Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everybody for joining me on today's episode as we dive further into the lore and game mechanics and history of the Pillars of Eternity games, gearing up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair Pillars of Eternity with Avowed, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so the hope of this podcast is that, for those of us who love the Pillars of Eternity lore and just really like to get into the game, we can talk about the lore that's there, the history of the game mechanics, etc., and we can just geek out about this stuff. And the other half of this podcast hope is that it will give people who are excited about Avowed but haven't played Pillars of Eternity a knowledge base to move forward with, so that when they play the game, they have a more appreciation of the world that they're playing in. They understand the nuances, maybe some of the references, etc. Today I'm going to be diving into the lore for the second Pillars of Eternity game, that's Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire. We're going to be talking about the history of that setting for the second game. We're going to talk about kind of the events leading up to when the game actually takes place in this fictional history that the Deadfire Archipelago is set within. Before I get going, I just want to apologize ahead of time if this recording sounds a little off. I have a wee bit of a cold going on here, and I'm trying to sound normal for you, but if you hear any discrepancy there, I apologize for that. But same content as always, and we're going to move forward with this as we go. No news to go over in regards to Pillars of Eternity or Avowed, so with that all said, we're just going to go straight into the day's lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
Before we dive into the actual history and the timeline of the Deadfire Archipelago, which again is the main setting for the second Pillars of Eternity game, it's an entire region in the world. Before we get started on that, we should probably give a little background information of what's going on. First off, when I am talking about the timeline, I'm going to talk about a year, and then I'll probably say AI. And AI is the calendar designation for the year. So like how you and I use CE or BCE, in Eora they use AI, which stands for Annie Maurizio, and it's just the person who made the calendar, the standard issue calendar in this fantasy world that we play in. As well, what the Deadfire Archipelago is well, A, it's a setting for the second Pillars game, which I've already mentioned. B, it's a region far to the east of any of the established superpowers of the world, at least at the time of the Pillars of Eternity games. It kind of represents a lawless frontier and a dangerous place that people have yet to explore. It is a smattering of islands far to the east with, dangerous ocean waves and storms and tales of mythical sea monsters that can devour ships whole and people living within the islands that wish you harm and blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of history there about what the Deadfire Archipelago represents to people who are looking from the outside in. For us as players, it's a place with a lot of islands, a great place to explore. It's got some native tribes to interact with, and then there's new factions that are coming in from other parts of the world. I recently finished a 2-episode series looking at the Huana culture, and those are the people that live in the Deadfire Archipelago. Those are the tribes of native peoples that live from island to island. As well, down the road, we're going to be talking about the Valian Trading Company, which is a mercantile company from Old Valia, or I guess Valian Republics technically. As well, we'll be talking about the Royal Deadfire Company, which is a group from a nation known as Rawatai, which are far to the north and having to survive horrible onslaughts of storms. And we're going to be talking about the Principi Sen Petrena, which is a pirate confederacy that is kind of splintering off from Grand Valia as their society crumbles. So we'll talk about them in future episodes. The Deadfire Archipelago is a great setting for this game for a number of reasons. From a narrative perspective, the Deadfire represents kind of this new hope for a bunch of different folks, different people. For the Valian Trading Company, the Deadfire Archipelago is a place where they can, grow their business and become even more powerful so that they can be like the main superpower of the world. For the Royal Deadfire Company, it's a means to harvest all the resources that the Deadfire Archipelago has so that they can save their people from not thriving in the country that they're currently in their homeland. And the Principe Sen Petrena, they're just trying to find a new home as their old one is crumbling. And as for the Huana themselves, they currently call this place home. And so they're trying to maintain their home as it is, but also figure out how to interact with these new people entering into the scene. Pillars of Eternity 1 and this game, Pillars of Eternity 2, take place in the early to mid 2800s within this calendar designation AI. And we're going to start the timeline for the Deadfire Archipelago back at 2640. So pretty much 2 centuries beforehand. We're not going to go into fine granular detail on every single thing that happens, but we're going to go through this timeline as it's outlined in the Pillars of Eternity 2 guidebook, which you can get a hard copy of on Amazon, or you'll have a PDF in your game files if you install Deadfire on your PC. So around 2640 AI, there isn't really a lot going on in the Deadfire to mention, other than the fact that we start to see the first people groups coming over to the Deadfire Archipelago. The reason that a lot of people don't push towards the Deadfire is, well, A, a lot of these superpowers are far, far to the west, and they've already expended a significant amount of energy and resources moving eastward to where the first Pillars of Eternity game is played, a continent known as the Eastern Reach. And to go any further is A, going to cost you more time and energy and resources that you may currently have, but also B, the waters over there are really choppy, very dangerous, and there's stories of creatures in the sea that will, destroy your ship. So there's not a real good reason to go to the Deadfire Archipelago other than for the sake of exploration, which I'm sure some people did, but they were far from establishing a colony. But there was always going to be interest in the Deadfire Archipelago because on the fringes of the region that is the Deadfire, you can see signs of the ancient Ingwithan civilization. You can see ruins of this ancient civilization that's there, which would be enticing to most because the ancient Ingwithan race, they're a mysterious bunch to everyone else in the world because they were this highly advanced technological super race of peoples that were here for a while and then are just gone. Outside of learning some spoilery stuff, we don't really understand what happened to them. And so a lot of people are going to be enticed by that. But again, there's not a real big motivation for any of these superpowers to push through these dangers and establish a colony there until they have a sufficient reason to do so. The first people that went there, outside of obviously the Huana peoples, which already lived there, were actually people from the Grand Empire of Valia, which is one of the older superpowers that I've talked about on other episodes. Their society was starting to crumble. They were having infighting between the major families that were holding the society up, and there was rebellions and blah, 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 blah. A lot of people were fleeing Valia in order to find a new home somewhere else. And a lot of people moved towards the Deadfire Archipelago. These people fleeing Valia, they ran into a tribe of people called the Wahiki tribe of the Huana peoples over in Deadfire Archipelago. And the Wahiki tribe is a little bit more militaristic and xenophobic. And so they were very, very staunch in fighting people off and killing the outsiders, etc., which led to a lot of these narratives about the dangers of the Deadfire Archipelago and how it's really not safe for anyone to go to. Fast forwarding ahead 68-ish years, we want to discuss a very important player within the Deadfire Archipelago's factions, and that is the Valian Trading Company. A very, very brief history of the Valian Trading Company is such that they arise from the Valian Republics, which in of itself was a confederacy of cities that originated from Grand Valia. So there's been a lot of exploring on by the Valian peoples. The Valian Republics, kind of being almost like a set of colonies from Grand Valia, they wanted to establish their own nation. They wanted to establish their own independence. And so in an effort to do that, they created what is known as the Valian Trading Company. The Valian Trading Company's only purpose in existence is to find ways to make the Valian republics rich. Is basically just give them more wealth, give them more power, give them more strength in the world. And the laws that apply in the Valian republics, where the trading company comes from, don't necessarily apply to the Valian Trading Company themselves. So they're kind of a lawless mercantile company working for the sake of their home country to make it more powerful. And that's the whole purpose of this organization. And these are one of the major players that enters into the Deadfire Archipelago. And understanding that history and foundation of where they come from matters when you recognize the decisions they make when they enter into the Deadfire Archipelago. And over the next 12 years, the Valiant Trading Company would see a lot of success throughout the world. And because of their lawlessness, but also because of the financial backing they had with little regard to have to justify it, they took higher risks than a lot of other nations would. And so the other empires of the world, such as Adir or Rawatai, they didn't take as many big risks, and so they didn't see as many big outcomes. Whereas the Valiant Trading Company, they were taking the big risks, and they were being relatively successful, and they are starting to establish dominance in the oceans and the lands of Eora. But this trading company wouldn't be the only Valian aspect in the Deadfire Archipelago. Switching our perspective over to Grand Valia, another one of the old superpowers of the world, their society is starting to crumble, and over the course of 4 decades, from 2720 AI to 2760, many families, wealthy families, and important people, they leave Grand Valia to go make a new name for themselves somewhere else, to start over, as it were. And many of these people turn their sight to the Deadfire Archipelago as the place to start over, as pretty much everywhere else in the world has been taken over by the Valian Trading Company or the other superpowers of the world. Unfortunately for them, by the time they actually get to Deadfire Archipelago and start setting up shop, as it were, they find that the Valian Trading Company and forces from the other nation Rawatai are also doing the same thing, and that they're too late, really, to be able to reap the opportunity that was in the Deadfire Archipelago for themselves. And these Valian people end up resorting to piracy to sustain themselves. And so these families start squabbling between each other and pirating against one another, and they start to become one of the more well-known factions in the Deadfire Archipelago that we speak of, the Principi Sen Patrena. In the middle of these 4 decades, around 2742, we have a very important event that happens, not because of the bloodshed that I'm about to tell you about, but because of the trade that was established. 2742, Dwarven explorers open trade with the Huana. The Valians are pouring into the Deadfire. More and more of them are coming every day. And Dwarven explorers decided to make port on a small island, and they established a location called Balefire Beacon. And there was a stone lighthouse there, a defensive tower, and they basically made it a permanent outpost. And it was at this location that they started to actually engage in discussion with the local tribes, the Huana. You remember I mentioned that there was a xenophobic tribe within the Huana peoples known as the Wahiki, who were scaring people off and fighting against them. This was a very important moment in the history of the Deadfire because it showed the first signs of peace between the outsiders and the native peoples that were here, and they were establishing trade between one another. Unfortunately, the dwarves were not going to stay there for long, not because the Huana attacked back, but because of a local creature, we'll call it. There's a wilder creature called the Naga. I did a bonus episode on them very recently. The Naga serpent humanoid peoples, whatever you want to call them, these Naga creatures came out of the sea and relentlessly attacked the dwarves that were on Balefire Beacon. And they almost completely annihilated them, but the dwarves were able to fight back. But sadly for the dwarves, in some nearby sea caves, a bunch of undead creatures started to come out in the nighttime as well. And, after a series of battles, all the dwarves were essentially moved from Balefire Beacon. The lighthouse was shut down, which means ships were no longer having the guidance they needed to enter into the Deadfire Archipelago, and they were sent to and fro without any guidance. But we had established trade in some way, shape, or form. 8 years later, the Valian Republics, and that is the Valian Trading Company, will have established their first permanent settlement, a major milestone in what they're trying to do. And the first settlement is the place that you actually start the game in, Port Mage. So those who have played Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, you start the game just outside of Port Mage. This is the first Valian Republic's settlement in the Deadfire Archipelago, at least the first permanent one. It wasn't an easy thing to do because the Valian Republics were trying to get the Huana peoples to accept their trade agreement, but it wasn't working. But they finally managed to stake a claim on this little small island on the edge of the island, and they were able to establish their first permanent basis there. A large reason that the Huana people didn't fight back here is, as we discussed in the Huana episodes, a difference in understanding between what land ownership is. If you'll remember from my Huana episodes, the people of the Deadfire Archipelago, the native peoples here, they don't really pick one place to live and move around, except for, of course, the city of Nekataka. they tend to be a mobile, nomadic group of peoples. They move from place to place as the nature and the resources determine whatever is best for their people group. They don't tend to stay in one place. And so they probably viewed this action of the Valians as kind of odd, like what they were doing, and didn't really think much. They probably assumed that they would pack up and leave at some point, and so there was no reason to fight them off. But new people coming into town, new ideas coming into town, they set up walls, and they set up structures that could survive, and the Valians created the first major settlement, Port Mage, and this became a waypoint for ships, a place for them to come and go to establish trade and get rest and recuperate. It represents a foothold now in the Deadfire Archipelago for people to run towards. It's not just the Valians, however, that are establishing trade routes and locations within the Deadfire Archipelago. 8 years after the opening of Port Mage, the Royal Deadfire Company is created by the empire known as Rawatai, who, interestingly enough, actually share a very ancient history with the Huana peoples of the Deadfire Archipelago, but you learn more about that from playing the game. To understand why the Rawataian people want to move in the Deadfire Archipelago, you have to understand where they come from. The land in which Rawatai is established is a very harsh and unforgiving land. Crops don't grow there very well, storms are constantly battering against their people. It is a hardy place to live, and it creates a hardy group of people as well. And what the Deadfire Archipelago represents to them is the opportunity to survive, because the soil there is rich and fertile. They can grow crops there. As well, it's not a place that someone has established power in, so they can establish themselves as a superpower. And to make it even more desperate for them, the Valian Trading Company has established dominance and almost a monopoly in every other location that the Rawatai has sailed out towards. But the Deadfire Archipelago, while the Valian Trading Company is there, they haven't monopolized it yet. And so there's still a chance. There's still a chance that the Rawataian government can send people over to the Deadfire Archipelago in the hopes that they can maintain dominance of the Deadfire itself, so that their people can survive and hopefully one day thrive. They're going to use the Deadfire Archipelago to make sure that their people survive. That's the hope behind it. And so the Ranganui, who is the leader of the Rawataian people, the emperor or whatever, if you will, creates the Royal Deadfire Company, which many Rawataians join onto because of their nationalism and their hope for survival. And so this massive, massive fleet and army from the Rawataian government is sent over, renamed the Royal Deadfire Company. Every single ship has a cannon, and they are one of the most established, powerful militaries in the world, at least in terms of naval military, and so this is a force to be reckoned with. Sadly, they were a little eager to gain a foothold in the Deadfire Archipelago, and as a result, they started having some incursions with the local sea creatures, the Naga, which we've talked about before. The Naga posed a very prominent foe for them, because they were unlike any other kind of creature that the Rawataians would have encountered necessarily. These creatures that could slither past an entire platoon of people and get to the center of an army posed a great threat. But I mean, at the end of the day, the Naga peoples, these sentient wild creatures, they stood little chance against the gunpowder and the cannons of the Rawataian fleet, and were eventually defeated. The Naga eventually retreated, kind of accepting their fate, as it would, and also kind of abandoning a lot of their homelands because the Huana peoples were not participating in the fight. And so the Naga are defeated not just in a militaristic sense, but also in a morale sense. That isn't to say that the Huana peoples didn't fight back at all. You might recall again the Wahiki tribe that I brought up earlier in this episode. They did fight back against the people of the Royal Deadfire Company, but being, again, outgunned and outmatched, the Royal Deadfire Company ended up dominating the seas and defeating the Wahiki tribe. And so the Royal Deadfire Company, through their technological and militaristic superiority, defeated the Wahiki tribe, the people who were the most xenophobic and defensive of the Deadfire Archipelago itself. They weren't completely annihilated, which means that they could come back. They could come back in force to try to reclaim what was theirs, but for now, the Royal Deadfire Company has established a win and they have gotten themselves into the Deadfire Archipelago to compete against the already far, far, far ahead Valian Trading Company for dominance of this little area of the world. And it's at this point that we're going to turn the century over into the 2800s. And so around 2801 AI, the Huana people start to fight back. Up till now, we've had the Valians in the forms of the Valian Trading Company coming in and establishing a monopoly in the area, but the Rowataians are also now coming in to try to survive for themselves, try to establish dominance so that they can make sure their country survives. As well, you got this pirate confederacy that's slowly forming over in the corner, doing their own thing. And so you have all these factions coming up, and the Huana peoples, especially after witnessing the defeat of the Wahiki tribe, are probably thinking like, hey, this is serious. There are things going on here, and we need to put our name into the mix. We need to establish ourselves as formidable, and we need to actually do something if we're going to have any say in what happens to our homeland in the coming years, in the future. And so what the Huana central government decides to do is to reestablish and revitalize the Water Shapers Guild. I've talked about the Water Shapers Guild before. In short, what they are is they are a unique group of peoples within the Huana tribes and cultures that are able to control and manipulate water. Not just little tiny puddles and stuff like that. They're able to change the currents of the ocean. They're able to, in harmony together, create massive tidal waves that they can use against their foes. The Valians and the Rowataians are too far established now to be able to rid them entirely out of the Deadfire Archipelago. And, secretly, the Water Shapers Guild is not very populated. There's not a lot of people in the Huana tribe that know how to water shape. This isn't a fact that the Valians or the Rowataians know, but thankfully, the Huana were able to keep that under wraps. But because of their small numbers and the growing surge of Rowataians and Valians in the area, they weren't able to push them out entirely. But they were able to make a formidable defense against them, to the point that if a Valian or a Rowataian ship would see a Huana fleet coming in, they would turn tail and get out of there. Because how are you going to stand against people that can summon the very power of nature itself to fight against you? This was a very proud and happy time for the Huana, and they felt like their god was in favor of them again. And they saw a great resurgency towards the Water Shapers Guild. And being overseen by Guildmaster Pariki, a lot of the kind of Water Shapers' power was starting to return to the fold because it was diminishing over the last several decades as well.
As promised, here's your payment. A pleasure doing business with you.
Not wanting to incur the wrath of the Huana peoples themselves, and also still trying to establish their own identity within the Deadfire Archipelago, the Royal Deadfire Company turned their sights towards a place a little more on the fringes of the region of the Deadfire, so that they can kind of stay away from the central part where the Huana will get mad at them, as well as a location that the Valian republics haven't really established a trade route on yet. The Royal Deadfire Company set their sights on this great reef in an area known as Hasongo. They do have to deal with the Naga in the area, which they definitely handle in an overly competent way. They establish their own location and a lighthouse at Hasongo, and it stays. The Naga are not able to get rid of them. The undead are not able to get rid of them. The Royal Deadfire Company has now put their major foothold at Hasongo and set up a lighthouse so that warships can come and go freely from the Deadfire Archipelago with guidance. Now, up to this time, I've been discussing the Valian Trading Company as having these trade routes and establishing power within the Deadfire Archipelago, like they are just making money hand over fist, and they are succeeding in every venture they possibly have. This isn't really true 100% of the time. Like, they are trying to establish themselves in this area, yes, but it's a lot of work, and the yield is not necessarily happening. But we know the Valian Trading Company take big risks for big rewards, and they are banking on big risks right now in the Deadfire Archipelago. They're succeeding in what they're doing, yes, but they haven't really seen the same payout as they have with other ventures. Until, that is, at the end of the second decade within the 2800s. In 2819, a animancer known as Irasa discovers something important within the Deadfire Archipelago, which changes the way everyone approaches the Deadfire. As backstory, animancers are people that study the soul. The soul in this world is a real tangible thing that you can measure and you can work with. It's not comprised of physical matter like you and I are, but it is comprised of its own special type of matter called essence. And the study of animancy is studying this essence, studying the soul energy, studying the matter that it is made out of. In this study of animancy, you use a resource unique to this fantasy world known as Adra. Copper as well, but Adra being the main thing that you're using. So animancers, these laboratory soul scientists, if you will, they're using Adra found throughout the entirety of Eora to perform their lab experiments and do research on the soul, etc., etc. And Irasa makes a very important discovery. It's probably been known for a while at this point that the Adra within the Deadfire Archipelago is very, very luminescent. It's a lot brighter. It's a lot more of a vibrant green than you see anywhere else, which is kind of a duller green. But they haven't really been able to research it very much at this point. But Irasa takes the time to do so, and she discovers that the amount of soul energy that is captured within the luminous Adra, as it becomes known as, in the Deadfire Archipelago, it's got so much energy in it that it literally rattles her devices and her instruments that are on her ship or in her laboratory. The amount of energy is so much that the other devices around can't handle just being near them. Some of them even shatter in the presence of enough of it. So with this discovery, she goes full bore into researching what Luminous Adra is and makes many, many finds. One of the most important things, which changes the Valiant Trading Company's attitude towards the Deadfire Archipelago in a positive way for themselves, is the distillation of Luminous Adra. Which is to say that they take this Luminous Adra, which has got boundless soul energy within it, and they find a way to actually distill it into a liquid form. And this liquid form Luminous Adra is then applied to the bodies of people, which have a variety of positive impact. This is something that the Valiant Trading Company takes note of and recognizes as their next big cash cow. This is something that no one else in the world has ever discovered or ever used or ever been able to do. It's brand new. It's in high demand. Because distilled Luminous Adra applied to the body can make you look more youthful, make you feel more youthful, and can arguably give you more youth in a way. It can make you powerful. Not to mention the fact that Luminous Adra is far more effective at animancy research than others. The Valiant Trading Company could be the leading group in animancy research and science. There's so much about this, on top of their secret distillation process that they have, which they are trying to make sure nobody learns of, because it's their trade secret. This causes the Valiant Trading Company to go all in on the Deadfire Archipelago, and they set their sights on Luminous Adra as the commodity of the world. And it is their version of striking oil in this new area that everyone is exploring. And it's around this time that the second Pillars of Eternity game is coming into. So this was 2819 when the Valiant Trading Company discovered Luminous Adra, and they started working on their distillation process. 4 years later is when the first Pillars of Eternity game is set. And so in a far off place within the world, Pillars of Eternity 1, the events that are going on there are happening in a distant location. But in the meantime, in the Deadfire Archipelago, the Valiant Trading Company is working on their secret plan with the distilled Luminous Adra, and the Royal Deadfire Company is trying to find a way to dominate the entirety of the Deadfire Archipelago so that their people can survive. And the Pirate Confederacy that exists there are establishing, well, more and more of their government, I guess you could say. They're establishing the pirate law and all that kind of stuff, and they're becoming their own formidable crew and group within the Deadfire itself. And it's into these tumultuous waters that you, the player, enter into Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. And in 2828 AI, we have something known as the Adra Colossus. This is the main turning point, and this is where the game enters into. There is a giant statue made entirely of Adra that appears to be trampsing its way through the Deadfire Archipelago from a far-off land, seemingly going off in some direction. Some people claim that it's just legend, that people are making stories up, but others claim to have seen it for themselves. The Adra Colossus is the entry point for you, the player, into the game. If you load up Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire for the first time, you'll understand why. This is how the game gets introduced to you. And so these are the situations that you, the player character, are going to be going into. You're going to be interacting with these 4 different groups of people. The Huana people who lived in this place natively for millennia. and are now trying to fight against these other three groups of people. A pirate confederacy that's trying to, work from the shadows and gain their family's honor back and become the people they once were. The Valiant Trading Company, who are trying to establish economic dominance over the entire world, and they're going to use the Deadfire Archipelago's Luminous Adra to do it. And the Royal Deadfire Company, who are trying to use the entirety of the Deadfire Archipelago as a way to supply and sustain their homeland, the Rawatai. And you, as the major player character, in an Obsidian RPG, of course, you're going to have a lot to say, and you're going to sway a lot of the decisions and influence and power of the Deadfire Archipelago, and it's up to you how it all goes down. That's it. That is the timeline of the Deadfire Archipelago from 2640 AI up until 2828 AI. I hope that wasn't too fast for you. I hope that was clear on how things work, that you understand the differences between the factions and all that. I certainly enjoyed doing this research and walking through the step-by-step process of what's going on. And I want to just give a quick praise to the people at Obsidian who A, wrote this stuff in this book, but also B, worked together to create this rich history and this interactions between these different faction groups that exist within this game. The Deadfire game is one of my favorite RPGs ever, and it was the place that I really started to fall in love with the lore of this world. The story from the first game is what really hooked me into the game and the characters, and then the lore in this game is what really got me into what I'm doing right now. And so as we gear up for Avowed, we love looking at this stuff. But speaking of Avowed, I guess that's a question that we should ask now, is what about anything we're talking about today has to do with Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Well, all of this lore taking place in the Deadfire Archipelago, there's probably not a lot we're going to see about it within Avowed, unless Avowed takes place in the Deadfire Archipelago, which it could. We don't know for sure where Avowed's going to be taking place in. The rumor right now is that it's the Living Lands, which is pretty much on the opposite corner of the map, if I understand how the map works. As well, if we look at the reveal trailer as any indication of what we might see within the game, it doesn't look Deadfire Archipelago-y at all. It looks like a massive continent with forested hills and stuff like that, rather than the kind of jungle and tropical islands that you can see. There are some biomes within the Deadfire Archipelago that I think might match some of the reveal trailer, but it's not really. It doesn't seem to have that same feel about it. It doesn't smell like the Deadfire is what I'm trying to say. So I don't think Avowed's going to be taking place in the Deadfire Archipelago. But that doesn't mean that there won't be influences from the Deadfire Archipelago that are within Avowed. As we discussed about the Adra Colossus at the end of this timeline, the Adra Colossus is actually something that originates from the Eastern Reach, which is where the first Pillars of Eternity game has taken place, in a continent far, far away. And so we have this one thing from far, far away that came to the Deadfire Archipelago, ended up being something important to the history there. And so who's to say that there isn't something that happens here in the Deadfire Archipelago that won't affect where we are for where Avowed is taking place? As well, it depends on if the game is a prequel or a sequel to the Pillars of Eternity games. If it's a sequel, then Obsidian might have to decide who the canon victor of the Deadfire Archipelago is, who becomes the most prominent faction, the most powerful group there. And that faction group, those peoples, will have a lot of worldwide power and sway about what goes on. We very well might see that group of people in Avowed itself, depending on when the game is played. So there's no direct thing that Deadfire Archipelago's timeline or history might impact Avowed, other than some references here and there. Perhaps we'll get to interact with some crew of Rawataians that are stopping at the port where the Avowed game is taking place before they set sail over to the Deadfire Archipelago. A little head nod and a reference to what's going on outside of the game we're playing in Avowed. But my personal prediction is I don't think we're going to see much. But we'll learn more as Obsidian reveals more information about the game as it undergoes development. For now, that's all we have today. Thanks everyone for joining me as I discussed the Deadfire Archipelago timeline. We took a look at all the factions, their history, why they're there, what's going on, and hopefully it gives you more of an appreciation for the game itself. If you haven't played the game, go and load it up. As a fair warning, it does spoil the ending of the first game for you, so if that matters, go play the first game. But it's a wonderful game, go set it up. And if you're looking forward to getting into the factions of the Deadfire Archipelago, as I am on this lore program, then this hopefully will set a good foundation for understanding that. That's everything to talk about today. There's nothing going on for me to bring to your attention about the show that's going on, other than I'm doing weekly content again, so there should be another bonus episode coming up next week for you guys to chew through as well. If you want to get a hold of me, you can email me, worldofeora@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter @worldofeora. I mostly just post updates about the show, but if anything else comes up project-wise, or if I want to reach out for some communication between me and you, that's where I'll do it. If you have any questions, feel free to email about the show, about the game, about the lore, if you want to point out an inconsistency that I might have, because I'm not the lore master that's the best out here. There's other people who know way more about the world than me. I just happen to be talking about it. I love getting in discussions with people. There's some people on Discord that I've known that I've gotten to connect with through email that we regularly talk. There's references on the show that I make to other people that I've met through email and on Discord and on the Reddit. It's a great community, and I want to invite you to be a part of it. And if you want to get in contact with me, that's how you can do it. Thanks, everyone, for joining me on today's episode. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.